The garage smelled the same way it always had. Motor oil, cedar sawdust from the workbench in the back, and something faintly metallic that never fully aired out no matter how long the bay doors stayed open. Harrison Pruett had worked in that smell for 22 years. He didn't notice it anymore. His daughter said it followed him home in his jacket. He believed her. He arrived at 6:15 every morning. The same as always, unlocking the side door with a key so worn the grooves had nearly smoothed flat. The coffee maker in the break room was older than most of his employees. He never replaced it. It still worked. That Tuesday, he was under a '98 Ford F-150 when his daughter called. "Dad." Celia's voice had that careful, deliberate quality she used when she was trying not to alarm him. She was 10 years old and already understood that her father needed to be handled gently around certain topics. Miss Patricia called the school again. Harrison set down his wrench. Miss Patricia was the school secretary. She called when tuition was late. It was late now by 3 weeks, and Harrison had been moving money around in a way that required a great deal of optimism and very little math. "Tell her I'll call back this afternoon," he said. "I already told her that last time." He lay still under the chassis for a moment. The undercarriage above him was rusted at the seams. He knew exactly what it would cost to fix. He was precise about those things. "I'll handle it, Celia." A pause. Then, "Okay." She hung up. He picked up the wrench. That was the thing about Harrison Pruett that most people missed entirely. He didn't react to things the way other men did. He didn't raise his voice. He didn't throw things. He absorbed. He processed. And then he went back to work, because the work was always there and always needed doing. And that was the one thing in his life that responded exactly as expected. The garage, Pruett and Sons Auto, though there were no sons, only Celia, sat on the corner of Millbrook and 5th in the town of Harwick, population 11,000 and declining. Harrison had inherited it from his father, who had inherited the building from his own father, though the business itself had only existed since 1978. The sign out front was sun-faded. One of the letters in Title had been slightly crooked for 6 years. He kept meaning to fix it. He drove a 2003 Silverado the color of old moss. The heater worked on the passenger side only. In winter, Celia sat up front. People in Harwick knew Harrison Pruett the way you know a landmark, by proximity, by habit, not by examination. He was the man at the garage. He was quiet. He was good at what he did. He coached Celia's soccer team on Saturday mornings, and he never missed a game, and he showed up to town council meetings and sat in the back, and never spoke unless someone asked him directly. He paid his bills when he could and explained himself when he couldn't, and he never, not once in 22 years, asked anyone for anything he didn't genuinely need. What Harwick did not know, what almost no one knew, was that Harrison's mother had been a Whitmore. Not a Whitmore from Harwick, a Whitmore from Boston, from the Whitmore Capital Group, which managed roughly $4.2 billion in assets across 6 states and had been doing so since 1963. His mother, Eleanor Whitmore Pruett, had left that world at 24 to marry a mechanic she'd met at a roadside diner outside of Albany, and her family had never entirely forgiven her. When she died, Celia was 2, Harrison was 38. She left her shares to her son in a trust administered by her brother, a man named Gordon Whitmore, who was 71 years old, deeply private, and had spoken to Harrison perhaps a dozen times in his entire life. Harrison had not told anyone, not because he was ashamed, not because he was scheming, simply because it had not come up, and because the trust was frozen pending a legal dispute with one branch of the family, and because the money didn't feel like his money. It felt like a problem that would eventually resolve itself or wouldn't. He was good at waiting. Sandra Kelsey had not been good at waiting. He had met Sandra 4 years ago at a benefit dinner for the Harwick Public Library, which he'd attended because Celia's teacher had organized it, and he'd volunteered to set up chairs. Sandra had come with a girlfriend and stayed because, she said later, she'd been charmed by the fact that he was the only man in the room who didn't appear to be performing anything. For 8 months, it was genuinely good. Sandra was sharp and funny and direct in a way Harrison found restful after years of managing the unspoken. She was a real estate agent with a good instinct for people and a laugh that arrived without warning. Celia liked her. That had mattered. Then the garage had a slow quarter. Then another. Harrison had renegotiated a commercial lease and lost the account, and the ripple moved through everything quietly. He didn't hide it from Sandra. He told her plainly. Things were tight. He was managing it. Sandra had nodded, said she understood. 3 weeks later, she came to the garage on a Wednesday afternoon when Celia was at school. She was dressed carefully, which he noticed. She stood in the bay with her hands folded in front of her, the way she stood when she had already made a decision and was simply there to announce it. "I've been seeing someone else," she said, "for about a month." Harrison wiped his hands on a shop rag. He didn't speak. "His name is Derek Holt. He's a developer out of Manchester. He just broke ground on the Riverside project." She paused. "I think it's serious." Harrison set the rag down on the workbench. He asked, because it seemed important to ask, "Does Celia know?" "No. I thought you should tell her." He nodded once. Sandra waited, perhaps for something, an argument, a scene, the kind of moment that would make this feel more proportionate to what she was doing. Harrison gave her none of it. "I hope it works out for you," he said. It was not sarcasm. It was not performance. He meant it the way a man means something when he has already accepted it and moved on to the next problem. Sandra left. Harrison stood in the empty bay for about 2 minutes. Then he went back to the F-150. He told Celia that evening as directly as he could in the kitchen over grilled cheese. Celia was quiet for a long time, and she said, "Was it because we don't have enough money?" Harrison set his sandwich down. "No," he said. "Kids at school say." "No," he said again, more gently. "It wasn't that." Celia looked at him with the particular skepticism of a 10-year-old who has already learned to read adults more accurately than adults prefer. He did not lie to his daughter. He had promised himself that years ago, when her mother left for different reasons that also had something to do with money, and something to do with ambition, and something to do with the gap between who Harrison Pruett was and who he was expected to become. He had told Celia the truth about that too in the version appropriate for a 6-year-old, and he had told her the truth now. What he didn't tell her, couldn't yet, was that 3 days after Sandra walked out of the garage, he received a letter from a law firm in Boston. It was 6 pages. He read it twice, standing at the kitchen counter at 11 o'clock at night with a glass of water he forgot to drink. The gist was this: Gordon Whitmore had died. The trust dispute had been resolved. As the sole living heir of Eleanor Whitmore Pruett's line, Harrison Edward Pruett was now the primary beneficiary of a portfolio that, after taxes and legal fees and the settlement of 3 ongoing disputes, would transfer to him assets valued at approximately $890 million. He set the letter down on the counter. He drank the water. He went to bed. He did not sleep well, but that was not new. In the morning, he drove Celia to school. He waved at the crossing guard, a man named Mr. Ferris, who had waved back at him every school morning for 6 years. He stopped at the gas station and bought a coffee in a paper cup that cost $1.75. He drove to the garage, unlocked the side door with the worn-out key, and started work on a Honda Civic with a blown head gasket. He called the law firm at 10 o'clock. He spoke to an attorney named Randall Bowe for 45 minutes. He asked questions carefully and listened without interruption. When the call ended, he went back to the Civic. He told no one. This was not strategy. It was not performance. Harrison Pruett simply didn't know yet what the money meant for his life, and he had never been a man who spoke before he understood something. So he waited, he worked. He paid Miss Patricia the school tuition in full the following morning, in cash, which made her look at him sideways. And he told her he'd had a good week, which was not untrue. The weeks that followed were quiet in the way that large things are sometimes quiet before they rearrange everything. Sandra Kelsey, meanwhile, was having what she considered the best season of her professional life. Derek Holt was everything. Harrison Pruett was not, at least on the surface. He was 47, tall in the way that fills a room, and he wore shirts that fit him the way shirts look in advertisements. He drove a black Audi. He had opinions about restaurants and expressed them confidently. He took Sandra to Boston for a weekend in October, and they stayed at a hotel that charged $300 a night. And Sandra took a photograph of the view from their room and sent it to no one in particular, which was its own kind of statement. She had told herself, in those first weeks, that the decision had been practical. Harrison was a good man. She believed that genuinely. But good men didn't always build things, and she was 39, and Harwick was a town where things stayed the same longer than felt reasonable. Derek was building something. The Riverside project alone was a $40 million development. He talked about the future in concrete terms: timelines, returns, square footage, projected occupancy, and Sandra found this profoundly reassuring in a way she couldn't fully articulate. She thought about Celia sometimes. The child had Harrison's stillness, watchful, private, not unkind. Sandra had not called. She didn't know what she would say. By November, Derek was introduced to Sandra's parents at Thanksgiving, and Sandra's mother said afterward that he had very good posture, which was her highest compliment. By December, Harrison Pruett had met twice more with Randall Bowe. He had also, quietly, begun conversations with a small group of advisors about restructuring the trust portfolio. The Whitmore Capital Group had been in operation for 60 years and was not in decline, exactly, but it had grown cautious in ways that cost money slowly and steadily, in the way that caution always does when it becomes indistinguishable from inertia. Harrison understood this intuitively. He had been running a business on thin margins for 2 decades. He knew where waste hid. He said little in these early meetings. He listened. He asked questions that people found, variously, either obvious or unexpectedly precise. The advisors, 3 of them brought in by Randall Bowe, were used to working with heirs who had strong opinions about things they didn't understand. Harrison was unusual. He had no strong opinions about the portfolio yet. He was learning it first. Celia, who had no idea what was happening, won her school's regional spelling bee in January and called her father from the principal's office, practically shouting, "Dad, I won. I beat Marcus Tillett and he's been practicing since September." Harrison was in the middle of a call with one of the advisors. He put the advisor on hold. "I know you did," he said. "I never doubted it. You didn't know. I didn't doubt it." "That's different." She laughed, a real unself-conscious laugh, the kind that he stored somewhere and returned to when things were difficult. He finished the call with the advisor. He drove to school at 3 o'clock, signed Celia out early, and took her to the diner on Route 9 for a piece of pie. She had the cherry. He had coffee. She talked about the spelling bee for 40 minutes without pausing, and he listened to every word. This was what Harrison Pruett's life looked like from the outside. A man and his daughter in a diner booth, a worn green jacket, a coffee that cost $1.75 even at the diner. The inside was slightly more complicated. In February, one of the Whitmore Capital advisors, a man named Douglas Pace, who had worked in private wealth for 30 years, pulled Harrison aside after a meeting and said, with the candor of someone who has run out of patience for indirection, "You understand what you're holding here. Do you understand that?" Harrison considered the question. "I'm beginning to," he said. Douglas looked at him for a long moment. "Most people in your position, first-generation heirs, no prior exposure to this kind of capital. Most of them panic, or they perform confidence. You do neither. I'm not most people." "No," Douglas said. "You're not." It was not until March that Sandra found out. It happened the way these things often happen. Not through confrontation or revelation, but through proximity. She was at a closing dinner for one of Derek's project partners, a man who worked in commercial real estate out of Manchester. The dinner was at a restaurant in Boston that Sandra had been to once before. She was seated between a woman she didn't know and a man who introduced himself as Randall Bowe, which meant nothing to her until, midway through the salad course, he mentioned almost in passing that he had a client in Harwick. "Small world," Sandra said. "It is," Randall said. "You know Harwick? I lived there. I'm from there, actually. A beat. What takes a firm like yours to a place like Harwick?" Randall smiled in the way attorneys smile when they have said something they shouldn't continue. "Estate work." Sandra let it go. She turned back to her wine. But later, as the table moved to dessert and the conversation loosened, she overheard Randall saying to the man on his left, quietly, but not quietly enough, something about the Whitmore portfolio and an heir who had been operating quietly for the better part of a year. She did not hear the name clearly, but she thought about it all the way home. She thought about it the next morning, and the morning after that, and then because Sandra Kelsey was a woman of direct action when she needed to be, she made a call to a woman she knew who worked in property records in Suffolk County. And she asked a question, and the answer that came back 3 days later was Harrison Edward Pruett, and the number attached to that name was the kind that makes your chest go cold. She sat with that information for 2 weeks. During those 2 weeks, she told Derek she wasn't feeling well, which was partly true. She was not sleeping. She kept returning to the moment in the garage, the way Harrison had set down the shop rag and not said anything terrible. The way he'd asked about Celia first. She had assumed so much from the outside of his life. The old truck, the worn jacket, the garage with the crooked letter. She had seen the surface and calculated the depth from it, the way you estimate the weight of something before you lift it, and she had been wrong in a way that felt, now, less like a mistake and more like a character flaw she was not prepared to examine too closely. She called him on a Thursday afternoon. Harrison was in the bay when the number came through. He looked at it for a moment, then answered, "Sandra Harrison." A pause. "I need to see you, in person. I know it's a lot to ask, but I think we need to talk." He had been expecting something, though not necessarily this, not this soon. "Okay," he said. "I could come by the garage. Celia's here after school on Thursdays." Another pause. "Right," he heard her recalibrate. "Saturday morning? Coffee? 10 o'clock, he said. The diner on Route 9. She arrived 7 minutes early. He arrived at 10 exactly in the green jacket, in the truck. He ordered coffee. She had something with oat milk that she didn't finish. He noticed that she looked tired. They exchanged the kind of brief, careful pleasantries that exist only to push against silence. And Sandra sent her cup down and said, "I know about the Whitmore estate." Harrison looked at her steadily. "I'm not asking for anything," she said immediately. "I want to be clear about that. I'm not here to. I don't have an agenda, I just." She stopped, started again. "I owe you an apology." "You don't. I do." She met his eyes. "I made assumptions about your life that weren't fair, about what you had, about what you were going to be able to." She shook her head. "It doesn't reflect well on me. I know that." Harrison turned his coffee cup slowly on the table. He said after a moment, "What do you want, Sandra?" She flinched slightly at the directness. "I told you I'm not here to. I know what you said. I'm asking what you want." A long silence outside. A truck pulled in from the highway. The diner was half full. Sandra looked at her hands. "I think I made a mistake," she said quietly. Harrison nodded. He looked out the window for a moment, then back at her. "Celia asked me," he said, "the night you left. She asked if it was because we didn't have enough money." He paused. She was 10 years old. Sandra closed her eyes briefly. "I told her no," he continued. "I don't know if I was right." "Harrison, I think you're a good person," he said. "I mean that. I think you made a decision based on what you could see, and what you could see was real. The money was tight. The garage was struggling. That was all true." Paused. "But I'm not interested in being someone's course correction." She looked up. "You didn't leave because of who I was," he said. "You left because of what I appeared to be, and those aren't the same thing. So what you're offering to come back to, it's still the same thing. The only thing that's changed is the number." Sandra opened her mouth, closed it. Her eyes had gone bright in a way that might have been argument, or might have been something else entirely. "You deserve better than that," he said. "And so does Celia." He left the tip on the table, exact change. As always, he said goodbye. He drove back to the garage. That afternoon, he called Randall Bowe and said it was time to begin the formal transition. He didn't rush it. He wasn't that kind of man. But the season for waiting had passed, and he knew it. The transition was quiet, the way all large things in Harrison Pruett's life were quiet. There were no announcements, no press. He asked Randall Bowe to handle the disclosures with discretion, and Randall Bowe, who had dealt with enough new money to recognize old character, did exactly that. What changed in Harwick was incremental and, for a time, difficult to source. The after-school tutoring program that had been cut from the elementary school budget was suddenly funded for 3 years by an anonymous donation. The fire station got 2 new vehicles it had been requesting for 4 years. A woman named Bet Marsh, who had owned the town's only bookstore, and could no longer afford the rent, since the building had been purchased by a development group, received a call from the new property management firm, informing her that her lease would be honored and her rate reduced. Bet told people about the call for weeks. No one could figure out who had bought the building. Harrison still opened the garage at 6:15, still drove the Silverado, still coached soccer on Saturdays, though now he also paid for the team's tournament fees, which he had always handled somehow but now handled more easily. Celia, who was 11 by the time she understood that something had changed about their circumstances, asked him directly one evening in the kitchen, "Dad, are we rich now?" He looked at her for a moment. She had his mother's eyes, observant, slightly amused. "We're comfortable," he said. She gave him the look, the one that meant she knew he was being careful with the truth but was willing to accept the version he was offering. "Do we have to move?" she asked. "Do you have to stop working at the garage?" He considered the question genuinely the way she deserved. "No," he said. "I don't think so." She seemed satisfied with that. She went back to her homework. He stood in the kitchen for a moment after she left. The coffee maker on the counter was old, older than the one in the break room at the garage. He had never replaced it either. It still worked. There was a decision he had made, not out of stubbornness, and not out of performance, but out of the particular clarity that comes to a man when he knows who he is, and has no reason to pretend otherwise, that his life would not be rearranged by this. The money would move through the world. It would do things. He would make sure it did good things, carefully and without theater. But the garage would open at 6:15. Celia would sit up front in winter. The coffee would cost $1.75 because it was fine coffee, and $1.75 was what it cost, and that was exactly the kind of thing Harrison Pruett had never felt the need to improve upon. He heard, eventually, that Derek Holt's Riverside project had run into permit issues that pushed the opening back by 14 months and cost the investors a number that Derek preferred not to discuss. He heard that Sandra had listed her condo and was looking at properties in Portland. He wished her well, and he meant it, the same way he had meant it standing in the empty bay with the shop rag in his hand. Harwick went on. The fall came the way it always did, cold and fast, the maples at the edge of town going orange overnight it seemed. Harrison drove Celia to school one morning in early October, the heater running on her side. She was reading something for class, her backpack wedged between her knees, her hair still slightly uncombed from the morning rush. She glanced up as they turned onto Millbrook. "Dad," she said. "Yeah, the sign's still crooked." He looked. She was right. The letter U in Otto tilted slightly to the left, the same as it had for 6 years. "I know," he said. "Are you going to fix it?" He pulled into the school drop-off lane, a long line of cars. Mr. Ferris at his post waving. "One of these days," Harrison said. Celia looked at him in the way she had, steady, patient, 6 steps ahead. "You always say that. I mean it every time." She laughed. She kissed him on the cheek, grabbed her backpack, and jumped out into the October morning. He watched her until she was through the doors. Then he drove back to Millbrook and 5th, unlocked the side door with the worn-out key, and started the coffee.